Hallelujah. I told our Rabbah to Elder Mikael, Judah 13, for playing some sounds for us, some good vibrations. Yeshua Koach to Mahim, Sheb, and M70 for the Parsha and the Half Torah. At this particular juncture in time, we're going to go and get into some current events. But as usual, I want to go ahead and open with the Kaddish D'Rabbanan. Yikadal v'yikadesh shemei Rabbah. Amen. Bi'amadi bara kerote v'yimelech malkute v'chayechunu v'yamichunu v'chayei the kol beit Yisrael bagalav izman kariv v'imuru amen. Yehi shmei Rabba Mavorach leolam ulmei almaya yitbarak v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yiramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitale v'yitalal shemei l'kudesha berikhu ve'ela min kol barakata v'shirata tush v'chata v'nechbeta damiran ba'ama v'imuru amen. Al Israel v'le'al Rabbanan, ve'al Talmidei Chun, ve'al kol Talmidei Chun, ve'al kol man dasekin borita, di batara chadein v'dei bakar atar v'yatar, yehe lachon ulchlon, shlama rabba, chine v'chasida, v'rachamin v'chayin arakin, zona, v'yicha ufachana, men kadam, abahundi b'shamaya v'imru amen, yehe shlama rabba, men shamaya v'chayin tovim aleinu, ve'al kol Israel v'imru amen, osei shalom b'imromav, Hu barachamav yaseh shalom aleinu v'yal kol Israel v'imru. Amen. Magnified and sanctified, may his great name be in the world he created by his will. May he establish his kingdom in your lifetime, in your days, and in the lifetime of all the house of Israel, swiftly and soon, and let us say Amen. May his great name be praised forever and all time. Blessed and praised, esteemed and exalted, raised and honored, uplifted and lauded be the name of the Holy One. Blessed be he, beyond any blessing, song, praise, and consolation uttered in the world, and let us say Amen. To Israel, to the teachers, their disciples, and their disciples' disciples, and to all who engage in the study of Torah, here or elsewhere, may there come to them and you great peace, favor, kindness, compassion, long life, ample sustenance, and deliverance from their Father in heaven, and let us say Amen. May there be great peace from heaven and good life for us all, and for us and all Israel, and let us say Amen. May he who makes peace in his high places, in his compassion, make peace for us and for all the house of Israel, and let us say, Amen. Again, as Bob Marley says, there are so much things to say. I'm going to go ahead and start. M70, I think I can go ahead and do it now that I got some admin purposes. But okay, Toda Rabbah. I'm going to throw one little curveball, though, to this article. Not to this article, but to the presentation. So if you can access this first article here, please give me a 4. The name of the article is an analysis by the Religious News Service. It is entitled, To Understand Pope Francis, Look to the Jesuits. And of course, we know that this is in the 266 popes that have been inaugurated. This is the first Jesuit pope in history. Now, interesting to note, at one particular time, there was Rodrigo Borgia was quoted, speaking of the Jesuits. He said, "We shall come in as doves, but we shall rule as wolves." He also went on to say, "We shall be cast out like dogs, but we shall return like eagles." So this is how Pope Francis has marshaled himself into this position. He has entered in as a dove, but he is slowly but surely revealing himself as a wolf. And they're going to be cast out like dogs, but they're going to get their wings plucked like eagles. This is why it's so essential to read the apocryphal book of 2nd Esdras. Esdras, as it's pronounced Esdras, but it is also known as 2nd Ezra. Really 4th Ezra. Sleep guy. So his nose is awful. I don't got nothing to wipe it with. So here we go. We're going to get this started. This article is written by David Gibson, and in this picture you see Antonio Spadaro, a Jesuit who conducted a book-length interview with the Pope and knows him well. Vatican City, Religious News Service, figuring out why Pope Francis has upended so many expectations how exactly he's changed the Catholic Church in his first year and what he might be contemplating for the future has become a Catholic parlor game that is almost as popular as the pontiff himself. A single key can best answer all of these questions. Francis's long-standing identity as a Jesuit priest. Now, you have to understand the history of the Jesuits and their intrigue, the fact that they were cast out through a papal bull in the, I believe, 16th, maybe 17th century, but they actually poisoned the Pope who wrote the bull and came back and have ruled from Rome under the authority of the General Superior of the Society of Jesus. Today, his name is Nicolas Adolfo from Spain, a Spaniard. But these very mischievous Jesuits are very important to understand in the greater scope of things. So it's an all-encompassing personal and professional definition that the former Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio brought with him from Buenos Aires, and one that continues to shape almost everything he does as Pope Francis. He may act like a Franciscan, but he thinks like a Jesuit, quipped the Reverend Thomas Reese, a fellow Jesuit who is a columnist for National Catholic Reporter. In fact, it would be easy to mistake this new Pope for a Franciscan, given his emphasis on helping society's outcasts and his decision to become the first Pope to take the name of St. Francis of Assisi, the patron saint of the poor. Yet he's the first Pope from the Society of Jesus, the religious community whose worldly wise, listen to this, whose worldly wise intellectuals are as famous as its missionaries and martyrs. Indeed, behind that Jesuit label lies a centuries-old history and a unique brand of spiritual formation that go a long way toward understanding who Francis is and where he is taking the church. From his passion for social justice and his missionary zeal to his focus on engaging the wider world and his preference for collaboration over peremptory action, Francis is a Jesuit through and through. And as the first Jesuit Pope, he brings sharply etched memories of being part of a community that's been viewed with deep suspicion by Rome, most recently by his own predecessor, Pope Benedict XVI. And it is rightfully so that this suspicion is deeply etched in the memories of Rome. Jesuit priests are explicitly discouraged from becoming bishops, much less Pope, and that outsiders' sensibility helps to explain Francis's almost breezy willingness to dispense with centuries of closely guarded and cherished tradition. We never imagined that a Jesuit could become Pope. It was an impossible thing, said the Reverend Antonio Spadaro, a Jesuit who conducted a book-length interview with the Pope and knows him well. It sent me into a crisis in a sense when he was elected. We Jesuits are supposed to be at the service of the Pope. Now this is where it gets interesting. Not to be a Pope. So now you have the people who are at the service, and we're going to get into what type of service, particularly the military aspects of the Pope, to carry out with impunity any of those who they consider heretics or enemies of the Roman Catholic Church. So what is a Jesuit? The Society of Jesus, as it is formally known, was begun in the 1530s by Ignatius of Loyola, a Basque soldier who underwent a profound religious transformation while convalescing from war wounds. Ignatius composed the spiritual exercises used to guide the Jesuits' well-known retreats, and in 1540, along with 6 other theology students at the University of Paris, these pop-ups are crazy, he won recognition from Paul III as an official church order. In many ways, listen to this, the Jesuits are like other religious orders, such as the Franciscans or the Dominicans. Jesuits take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and they live in community, sharing everything, including one another, shall I add. But unlike diocesan priests, they are not ordained to a particular geographic diocese to serve the local bishop. They are a global arm of the papacy. So here you see Ignatius Loyola standing on a gorgon, looks like a Medusa type of figure, okay? But Jesuits are an all-male order. There are no Jesuit sisters. The society has an not almost, it is a military style structure and ethos. It shocks troops willing to go wherever and whenever the church needs them. They are contemplative in action. In the words of St. Ignatius, and have especially lengthy periods of study and spiritual preparation before taking vows, usually 10 years or more. So this is what accounts for the craftiness, the well refined and thought out answers of this Jorge Bergoglio, who is now known as Pope Francis. Even then, the process is not complete. After another few years, most Jesuits take a special fourth vow of obedience in regards to mission to the Pope. And this is where you have to really get into the secret oath. And this is where it's dealing with right here. This indeed, the secret oath of the Jesuits. If the church needs priests to reconvert souls lost to the Protestant Reformation, the Jesuits are on it. And this is by any means necessary. Torture, murder, bribery, you name it. If they are needed to bring Catholicism to new lands, such as Asia or Latin America, they'll buy a one-way ticket. To advance the church's mission, the Jesuits have shaped generations of minds through universities such as Georgetown and countries and kingdoms, but Fordham and Boston College, very, very prestigious universities in the United States of America, aka Babylon. Despite the simple beginnings, the Jesuits quickly became and remained the largest order in the Catholic Church. Its leader was called the Black Pope for his distinctive austere black cassock, as well as his perceived power, which is not perceived by most. It's little wonder the cardinals never wanted to elect a Jesuit as the actual pope, and no wonder the society wound up a target of the church it was called to serve. In 1773, Catholic monarchs supposedly jealous of the Jesuits' influence and independence, pressured Pope Clement XIV to suppress the order, declaring the society perpetually broken up and dissolved. Yet in 1814, the order was restored, an anniversary that Jesuits are celebrating this year. Interesting that a Jesuit is now the Pope this year as well, along with the election of one of their own to the throne of St. Peter. Now, this year is very peculiar in that it will also commemorate a jubilee, the 6,000th jubilee or the 120th jubilee according to a Torah calendar website, which will commemorate at the Yom Teruah, or the Festival of Trumpets. So it's interesting that the adversary's counterfeit kingdom and the most express order that he has used, particularly the Jesuits, also is going to be recognizing its 100-year celebration. Very interesting. In the 60s, though, the Jesuits collectively opted for a decisive shift to emphasizing working on behalf of the poor and for social justice. In the developing world, that put Jesuits on the front lines of popular movements for the poor, such as liberation theology, and led to martyrdom at times. In El Salvador, 6 Jesuits, along with their housekeeper and her daughter, were brutally executed by a Salvadoran military unit in 1989. Continuing on with this article after the picture, which you see, which is the tomb of Ignatius Loyola. At the same time, the Vatican under Pope John Paul II aided his doctrinal czar, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who is also Pope Benedict XVI, who came from the office of the Inquisition, investigated, sanctioned, and sometimes silenced Jesuit theologians who were considered too eager to marry the gospel to suspect social movements. Jesuits have also fallen victim to what some call the white martyrdom at the hands of the Pope. As recently as 2005, Rees was forced out as editor of the Jesuits America magazine when his longtime foe, Cardinal Ratzinger, was elected Pope Benedict XVI and ordered the society to fire him. Okay, so what kind of Jesuit is Francis? Very crucial to understand his history in Argentina. As a Jesuit in Argentina, ordained in 1969, Jorge Bergoglio also found himself in the midst of all his tumult. He had initially joined the Jesuits in the 50s because he was attracted to its position on, to put it in military terms, the front lines of the church. So he knows what the deal is. But little did he know how serious the combat would become. The Argentine Dirty Wars erupted during the 1970s, and the violence that overtook the country also threatened many priests, especially Jesuits, even as the regime co-opted much of the hierarchy. That means the regime under, oh my goodness, his name was, what was the name of the guy down there? Oh my goodness, uh, the name of the dictator at that time in Argentina. His name is escaping me for some reason. Nonetheless, it begins with a P, I believe, but he co-opted this Jesuit. Was it Juan Perón? Toda, Juan Perón. Okay. So Bergoglio was made superior of the Argentine Jesuits at the age of 36, thrown into a situation of internal and external chaos that would have tried even the most seasoned leaders. So what did he compromise to get thrown into the superior of these Jesuits in a most tumultuous country at that time? That was crazy. I had to deal with difficult situations, and I made my decisions abruptly and by myself, Francis said last year, acknowledging that his authoritarian and quick manner in making decisions led me to have serious problems and to be accused of being ultra-conservative. Now, he's also, through the International Criminal Court, in a website called the International Tribune Against Crimes of Church and State, Kevin Annett, and I put them all up on my on the blog, not my blog, but the blog of Hebrew Vision. He is actually being accused of child sex slavery and genocide. Okay, so this is what's going on. So Bergoglio fully embraced the Jesuits' radical turn to championing the poor, though he was seen as an enemy of liberation theology in many Jesuits, while others in the order were devoted to him. He turned away from devotional traditionalism, but was viewed by others as still far too orthodox. Critics labeled him a collaborator with the Argentine military junta, even though biographies show that he worked carefully and clandestinely to save many lives. Well, that's what biographies say, okay? Excuse me. So none of that ended the intrigue against Bergoglio within the Jesuits, and in the early 90s, he was effectively exiled from Buenos Aires to an outlying city, a time of great interior crisis, as he puts it. He was exiled. Very interesting. In classic Jesuit tradition, however, Bergoglio compiled with the society's demands and sought to find the Father's or God's will in all. Paradoxically, his virtual estrangement from the Jesuits encouraged Cardinal Antonio Quarencino of Buenos Aires to appoint Bergoglio as an assistant bishop in '92. Maybe a bad Jesuit can become a good bishop, an Argentine Jesuit said at that time. In '98, Bergoglio succeeded Quarencino as archbishop. In '01, John Paul made Bergoglio cardinal, one of just 2 Jesuits in the 120-member College of Cardinals. His rise in the hierarchy, however, only seemed to cement suspicions about him among his foes among the Jesuits. Listen to these now. During his regular visits to Rome, Bergoglio never stayed at the Jesuit headquarters, but rather at a clerical guest house with other prelates. In the 2005 conclave that elected Benedict XVI, Bergoglio was the runner-up, a near miss that left many Jesuits breathing a sigh of relief. So when Bergoglio was chosen as Pope in March of 2013, one could almost hear the collective gasp in Jesuit communities around the world. The fact he had been somewhat rejected internally by the Jesuits, if not for that he probably would not have become a bishop, said the Reverend Humberto Miguel Yanez, an Argentinian Jesuit like Francis, who heads the moral theology department at the Gregorian University in Rome, a Jesuit school sometimes called the Pope's Harvard. And if he had not become a bishop, he would have not become a cardinal and ultimately pope, since the College of Cardinals, by tradition, chooses each successor to St. Peter from among their own ranks. The stone that the builders rejected, Yanez quipped, citing Jesus' words in the Gospel of Matthew, became the cornerstone. Now, this is very interesting because you have to see how this is lining up with the counterfeit man of sin, the counterfeit Messiah and man of sin being manifest in these times. These are his own colleagues speaking about him, okay? So the intrigue about this is just beyond reason. What will a Jesuit Pope mean for the church? Now, of course, all is forgiven and then some. Francis is a brother among brothers, as they say. As the current head of the order, the Reverend Adolfo Nicolas puts it. So it's not Nicholas Adolfo, it's Adolfo Nicholas. and Francis has made a point of highlighting the importance of the Jesuits and the Ignatian way for the church. Francis also knows how much the Jesuits are still resented by some corners in the church, and especially in the Vatican, but he has not let that alter his own deeply Jesuitical style. Last December, he circumvented the usual protocols to canonize one of Ignatius' original companions, Peter Favre, whom Francis is praised for being in dialogue with all, even the most remote, and even with his opponents. The same could be said for Francis' papal style. He lives simply, rejecting the traditional papal apartments to live in a small community inside a Vatican guest house. The Pope also preaches forcefully that other clerics, especially the hierarchy, should eschew the perks and privileges of their office and instead learn to act and live like the servants of their flock he says they're called to be. Francis' pastoral style extends to his mode of governance. Well, we're going to get into an article that's going to talk about his very intriguing mode of governance, because this is an individual we need to definitely keep our eyes on in terms of what is coming forth, both expressly and both innocuously from the Vatican, because this man here is a prime example of the intrigue that has been historically rampant through the Vatican. And if you have not seen any season of what is called the Borgias, which is, speaking of Pope Alexander the 16th, I would strongly recommend that you watch the Showtime series. It's on Netflix. If you don't have Showtime, profound. But this second article addresses that matter. And this is something that is a huge smokescreen. Of course, I'm speaking of Malaysian Flight 370 that people said is completely missing. Well, this article from Press Corps, written by Paul W. Kincaid, called Vatican Fourth Reich Armada of Warships Assembling in South China Sea, has a very alternative view of what the missing plane and the surrounding hoopla in the media is really all about. So when you get this article, press 4, and we're going to get this going, because all this is connected. Okay, you look at what's going on in Ukraine, you look at what's going on in Venezuela, you look at what's going on even in Israel, you look at what's going on in Syria, the Sudan. All these things, whether we know it or not, is a chessboard, which is the next article is going to talk about. So two have said that they received the article. Let's get it going. The United States, the UK, and Malaysia are using the search for the downed Malaysia airline flight MH370 that has already been found on March 7, some 153 miles south of Phu Quoc Island, as a cover so that the Vatican Fourth Reich can assemble an armada of warships in the South China Sea. Warships from 26 nations are now converging in the South China Sea. They are claiming they are looking for Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370. However, Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 wreckage was found the same day it was shot down 153 miles south of Phu Quoc Island. The search is the cover story. A search for the downed airline is being used as a pretext for war against Russia and China, should China support Russia's defensive maneuvers in Crimea. Now, what confirms this? And Uzziah sent this to me and brought this to my attention. Freescale, which is a company in Texas, it's a electromagnetic warfare developing corporation, had a patent that was split 5 ways, 4 of which were with individuals. The 5th was with the company. Well, the 4 individuals who were the patent holders in Kuala Lumpur, which is in Malaysia, were on that flight MH370, and they were 20% shareholders. So the 100% of this patent, which was an electromagnetic warfare device, was held between 5 individuals. 4 of the individuals died. The patent, 4 days after their disappearance, was accepted. So Freescale received 100%, which is a Rothschild-owned organization or corporation, became the sole shareholder with no argument from no family member nor the patent holders before. This is what confirms that this flight was shot down, because follow the money. If you always follow the money, it'll show you what's going on. Now, what this is really about now, what this smoke and mirrors is about now, is setting up this war that the Vatican, with the United States, its military branch, with the United Kingdom, which is its economic branch, with Canada, who is a doggone flunky crony country that's being used as well, are all in league with this. So let's continue this article on. NATO, for the most part. Yes, indeed. United Nations and NATO. When Vatican religious fanatics in Ukraine, when they start shooting and killing Russian civilians in Ukraine and independent Crimea, Russia will have no choice but to commit military forces to protect Russian civilians living in Ukraine and independent Crimea from the unlawful Vatican aggression. The Vatican is intent on starting World War III by waging war with Russia. It will start World War III the same way it started the Ukrainian uprising after the elected Ukrainian government announced it was exiting the Vatican EU, Vatican-occupied Europe. It will once again order its homicidal maniacs from the Catholic Militant Religious Order of Malta to indiscriminately kill Ukrainians of Russian descent in Ukraine and now independent Crimea, which is aligned with Russia. The Canadian, US, and UK governments and media have been ordered to support the Vatican's hostile aggression against Ukraine and its people by falsely blaming Russia for the Vatican's mass murdering of Russian and Ukrainian civilians in Ukraine and Crimea. The United States, the UK, and Canadian governments have been ordered by the Crown, the Catholic Church Pope, to plan, prepare, initiate, and wage wars of aggression against Ukraine and Russia in violation of US, UK, Canadian, and international law. So this is where you see this Jesuit, this militarily trained priest come to the forefront. Very stealth. In Canada, agents having no traitorous sworn allegiance to the Crown Pope are preparing to apprehend Stephen Harper, the Prime Minister of Canada, for high treason, crimes against peace, and crimes against humanity for participating in the Crown's conspiracy to wage wars of aggression against Ukraine and Russia. Under S-46 of the Criminal Code, a person commits high treason who B, wages war against Canada or does any act preparatory thereto, or C, assist an enemy at war with Canada or any armed force against whom Canadian forces are engaged in hostilities, even if no state of war exists. The 1950 Nuremberg Principles define crimes against peace to include 1. Planning, preparation, initiation, or waging of war for aggression of war in violation of international treaties, agreements, and assurances. And 2, participation in a common plan or conspiracy for the accomplishment of any of the acts mentioned under 1. United States Justice Robert Jackson, Chief Nuremberg Prosecutor of Vatican Third Reich war criminals, stated, quote, "To initiate a war of aggression, therefore, is not only an international crime, it is the supreme international crime differing only from other war crimes in that it contains within itself the accumulated evil of the whole." The Nuremberg trials established that all of humanity would be guarded by an international legal shield and that even a head of state would be held criminally responsible and punished for aggression and crimes against humanity, end quote. Canadian Justice Anne L. McTavish, in the case of Hensman v. Canada, addressed the issue of personal responsibility. Quote, she says, "An individual must be involved at the policy-making level to be culpable for a crime against peace. The ordinary foot soldier is not expected to make his or her own personal assessment as to the legality of a conflict. Similarly, such an individual cannot be held criminally responsible for fighting in support of an illegal war, assuming that his or her personal wartime conduct is otherwise proper," end quote. Stephen Harper is now culpable for the crime against peace charge. He is the primary illegal war policy-making individual in Canada who is actively, 1, planning preparation, initiation, or waging of a war of aggression or a war in violation of international treaties, agreements, or assurances, and 2, participation in a common plan or conspiracy for the accomplishment of any of the acts mentioned under 1. The Vatican is the enemy of Canada, the US, and all European states because it has already waged 2 world wars against them. The Vatican Second Reich, World War I, and the Vatican Third Reich, World War II. Okay, so these are the two Reichs coming from Germany, under Germany, which was an extension of the Vatican or the papal crown. The Jesuits were in that hugely, okay? So Stephen Harper is now preparing to wage war with Canada by assisting a foreign state, Vatican City State, and its head of state, the Pope, wage war with Ukraine and Russia in order to complete the Vatican's Fourth Reich. Today, states and their military forces that fought to the death to defeat the Vatican Third Reich and liberate Europe from the Vatican Third Reich occupation of Europe are now preparing to illegally wage war for the Vatican Fourth Reich. Soldiers from Canada, the United States, and England fought and died to liberate Europe from the Vatican Third Reich. Today, all three Western countries, former D-Day Allied forces, are planning to mass murder the people of Europe and Russia instead of liberating them. All three are dishonoring the courageous sacrifice our fathers and grandfathers voluntarily made in 2 world wars so that Europe could be freed from the tyranny of the Catholic Church. Stephen Harper, Barack Obama, and David Cameron have treacherously defected and are not planning and preparing to wage war against Canada, the United States, and the Protestant UK for the Vatican and its Fourth Reich. Wow. So let's analyze this. A recent FBI finding has proven that Hitler did not die in Germany. The documents state that Hitler was known to have fled to the Andes Mountains in what other country but Argentina, the country from which Jorge Bergoglio, also known as Pope Francis I, hails from. Now, what does that have to do with anything? Again, the Nazis, who were flown to the United States of America and other countries of protection because of the Jesuit orders, went underground and assimilated in the countries which they were protected under, such as the United States with Project or Operation Paperclip. And so, the Chicago boys, Mosaic, stop hollering. And so all these things that we're seeing unfolding today in the Ukraine and Greece, these neo-Nazi uprisings, it's not a mistake that it's happening because the sign for them to move forward is clear. You have a Jesuit as the Pope from Argentina, where Hitler hailed from. All these things are coming together in place. Messiah, settle down, please. Tone down. So let's go to this next article. This is an article from Global Research. It is called The Eurasian Chessboard. Brzezinski, speaking of Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the national security advisor to several presidents, but first to Jimmy Carter. But Brzezinski mapped out the battle for the Ukraine in 1997. I don't know about you all, but this was the year that consciousness came about for me. 97, at a tender age of 22. That's when I really became a little more aware. Shebaniah